So thank you again for joining. I recognize actually a lot of you. So it's like whenever you present and do a show and tell and your family shows up and there's two friends. So thank you for coming. Um, Justin, he unfortunately had a family emergency, so he's not going to be able to attend here today. But what I would like to do is give you somewhat of an update on what is new in the Common Security Advisory Framework standard and what is actually happening and what is the state of the union for OpenEoX. Rogue, which was presenting right before me, he was actually going over the use cases in Red Hat of OpenEoX. So I'm gonna, take a step back and actually introduce, what we're trying to do and so on. Let me see. I have two systems to go through. There we go. So again, my name is Omar Santos. I'm from Cisco. Whole bunch of boring stuff that I do. One of them is around vulnerability disclosure for quite some time. A lot of the folks from the PISA organization and PISA at Cisco are right there in that table. But I'm part of an organization called Security and Trust. So PISA, CISA, the offensive security team, now AI security research, market access, you name it. We're 1,100 people. We look into how to secure Cisco and also how to secure the products that we actually make and help protect customers. So I oversee now responsibilities from a technical perspective. In there, outside of Cisco, I am part of the organization called OASIS Open, which is a standards organization that CSAF and OpenEoX belong to. How many of you have heard of OASIS before? Actually, let me take this back. How many of you have not heard of OASIS before? Okay. So the super fast, if you have an Amber Alert in your phone, that's an OASIS standard. They've been in existence for more than 25 years. So now they're really, really popular because of cybersecurity and now even with AI. So I'm part of the board in there. I co-lead a few efforts related to standards, specifically CSAF and OpenEoX. And I'm also honored to be the co-chair for the Coalition for Secure AI with Anthropic, OpenAI, NVIDIA, a whole bunch of different companies actually trying to figure out how to guide the rest of the industry on how to protect our ecosystem now with these emerging technologies. Justin, I'm going to introduce him even if he's not here. He actually was here yesterday presenting. You might already have interacted with him. He's from CISA, amazing contributor to the community, both in CSAF and OpenEoX, but also in the SBOM ecosystem, and of course with the Vulnerability Explorability Exchange. I'm going to put one more person under I'm going to throw him under the bus, but it's Thomas Schaefer. He's from BSI in Germany. If it wasn't for this guy, probably even CISA would not exist right now. So amazing contributions that they're doing, not only on the standards and the technical work, but a lot of open source tools that they actually have created. I'm talking about a plethora of them. So thank you, Thomas. And actually, he's going to keep me honest here today. As I mentioned to you, of course, these two standard efforts are under OASIS. However, this is so currently we stand at the second version of the standard. Before CSAF, it was called the Common Vulnerability Reporting Framework, and it was under a nonprofit organization that got merged with FIRST called ICASI. As a matter of fact, Bruce in the back was one of the original contributors to the standard. And we had a need into how can we modernize. Back in the day, and Bruce, correct me if I'm wrong, I think this was back in 2012 that we started around that era, CVRF. We called that modernize, and everybody actually now calls modernize, right? But we wanted to say, hey, instead of humans actually exchanging vulnerability information, how can we actually have machines and machine speed do this? You fast forward many years, we're still trying to struggle how machines can exchange vulnerability information in the whole ecosystem, even in the age of AI, right? So what we did is within ICASI, we had these initiatives, but we were not a standards organization. So we decided is, of course, because of IPR, I'm not going to bore you to death, we decided to change the name and actually bring it up to OASIS. And that's what actually took off. BSI started contributing, and many organizations across the world. So it is a successor of CBRF. So if you were familiar with that, long story short, now a lot of companies are actually using it and government organizations around the world. It is an ISO standard. It hasn't been fully announced because we're working still with ISO and actually making it public, so you don't have to pay for the thing. But of course, what is a presentation nowadays with our Ghibli generated image? So what I want to actually do is at least start going over what is new in the newer version that we're working on as we speak. Kind of hot off the oven, but it's still in the oven. We haven't brought up the whole cake out, but some of the things that actually are coming and that were completely overdue. One of them, of course, is enhancements to the schema itself. So if you're not familiar with CSAF, we have the main schema. Think about your security advisory, and that schema has different profiles. It has a profile for VEX, profile for generic or traditional security advisories, profile for even incidents that you want to actually report that are not security vulnerabilities, and so on. So that's the core schema. We also need a way that you can discover these documents also using machine readable content. So there's a provider metadata, and where if the vendor is actually putting this into a .well-known file or .well-known structure, for those of you that are familiar with that, it's a standard, another standard, yet another one. That one where through your namespace or your domain, you can say cisco.com or redhat.com/.well-known, and then in there you can have your provider metadata, so your CISA provider metadata, your security.txt. A lot of different standards are now being incorporated in that structure. And then if I am a person, like whether it's a consumer, a coordinator, a security researcher, and so on, I can go to that predictable URL, and then I can discover where you're putting the security vulnerabilities. Because the problem in the past is not just to have a pretty JSON document that is somewhere that you cannot find anywhere. It's actually finding the thing, right? And then there's also the personas of coordinators and also governments like BSI and so on, that they also have aggregation and listing agents. But I'm going to skip that because most of you are either a vendor or a consumer. How many of you are a coordinator agency? Only one. So sorry, you're the minority, so I'm going to skip some of the elements in that, but I'll highlight a few things. One that it was super overdue. It was actually we talked about modernizing the standard to catch up with the new TLP. Super easy, right? So 2.1 supports that. The other one is a publisher object. So in 2.1, the publisher object category enumeration is now expanded to include multipliers, so multiple, alongside the values of what I just mentioned before, of coordinator, discoverer, think about it like a security researcher, or any other type of category. So this is actually new, that didn't exist at all in CSAF 2.0. And specifically, whenever now you have different personas and different use cases for using this type of information, a security advisory that a vendor or a security researcher actually will create, we needed to identify what is actually not only the provider, but what is the persona that was actually now engaged in the creation of this document. The other one is in the product identifications. We talked about SBOMs, and I think that you started actually the conversation just 30 minutes ago. We're talking about SBOMs. We're talking about end of life, which is the second part of the conversation here. But a lot of people actually ask, so are you trying to actually do another SBOM? Or are you trying to actually reinvent the wheel? And the short answer is no, right? And but we have to have some type of product identifiers to say what this vulnerability affects, right? Now, CSAF, not in 2.1, but in 2.0, we actually included the support for SBOM references, so specifically for the profile or the use case of VEX, the Vulnerability Exploitability Exchange. How many of you are familiar with VEX? Okay, perfect. So if you're using VEX, of course, you can actually refer to a point in time, I already call it point in time, SBOM, like a Cyclone DX or SPDX format document. Even though there's actually implementations within that, we actually support that as a profile in VEX. So a lot of people got confused whenever we started actually saying product identification, whether it's for a VEX document, for a traditional security advisory, and so on. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel with an SBOM. We can absolutely make a reference to that. But again, we have to actually say this vulnerability affects something, and that something has to be identified somewhat. In 2.1, we're actually making and continue to make different enhancements. A couple of things is renaming things to be more aligned with other standards for identifying that product. How many of you are familiar with Perl? Okay, so most of you. So of course, support for Perl is actually one. In the CSAF 2.0, we actually have singular. Now we actually can have multiple and an array that requires that. The other thing that we actually enhance is the vulnerability representation. So, the weakness representation, so a plural of CWEs, because in many cases, you will have not just one CWE. So that was a very big limitation of CSAF in the past, especially for us at Cisco, that in many cases, actually, we have multiple vulnerabilities in a security advisory, and some of them may actually have their own CWE, right? Or one vulnerability can also have multiple CWEs as well. The other thing is the date field. I'm not going to bore you to death, but we actually make enhancements of that, specifically to the disclosure and the discovery date. A lot of even vendors, but other coordination agencies and even the consumers ask when this vulnerability was discovered and what was actually disclosed, right? And we didn't have that support. I'm not going to go into the politics of that, but we didn't have that support in the standard. There's definitely a lot of use cases for that in the industry. The other thing is we changed from just calling CVSS and just focusing on CVSS for scoring, but we now are calling it metrics. Why? Because you also have things like SSVC, right, that we started actually supporting, and one of the use cases for that, it was for coordination agencies that also are using this, and of course, enterprises that are consuming this information and trying to prioritize based on a decision tree on how they should respond to a given vulnerability. So now we have support, of course, for CVSS 4.0, which is overdue, but also support for SSVC as well. Few remediation enhancements that we have, especially around the remediation property and category enumeration that we introduced within the standard. I mean, I'm going to go really quick on this. All these slides are going to be posted. And as a matter of fact, all this is being documented as we speak. 2.1, just I should have started with that, is not out yet, but we are actually working pretty hard, especially this gentleman right here, on a lot of the final tweaks for the schemas and also the community specification draft. What does that mean? Whenever you have an OASIS standard, you first write the draft for that. We call it community specification. And then you have all the member companies and member organizations within OASIS review that. Then we do a public review. So we get feedback from the public. And then after that, there's some voting, in between that. I'm skipping a lot of things. But then after that, you actually release the standard. Once the standard is out, then we also vote whether you want to actually submit it to ISO and so on, right? So it's a pretty intense process. We're in the middle of actually pretty soon creating the community specification draft for that. How many of you use Raleigh? How many of you know what Raleigh is? Awesome. Only one. Actually, can you explain what Raleigh is?
It's an RFC I was made aware of by Red Hat. And when we initially introduced the distribution logic into CSAF, it was built for lightweight information exchange of security information. And basically, it works like an Atom publishing feed which you can use to announce your the location of your security advisories.
Thank you. So in CISA, for those of you that don't know, we actually support directory listing. So you can, vendors can actually publish that in a normal directory. Some organizations, including CISA, the CSAF and CISA, but including CISA, they actually use even GitHub. And they have directory listing, and you can get that information from there. Raleigh is I would call it a more proper standard. It's an RFC, right? And in that case, the amazing part is actually discoverability, which is the thing that I'm honing the most in here, because we can have the perfect standard, but if nobody actually can find it, that will be, it's a moot point. We did some enhancements for public PGP keys. So as you see, there's a lot of new enhancements to the standard per se. And I'm going to pause for a second before I shift to OpenEoX. But I'm going to start with a couple of questions. How many of you already use CSAF? Oh, that's great. So it's about 45, 50% of the room right now. For those that use CSAF, how many of you are vendors? How many of you are consumers of CSAF? Amazing. Wow, excellent. So as you know, just like any other standard, one of the main things that we're trying to do is drive adoption, but adoption of just pointing somebody to read a specification, that doesn't work like that, right? So we have to build tools, whether you're a vendor, a security vendor, and you don't even know what CSAF is, or you have struggled to actually put CSAF, please contact us. We want to actually talk to you, because again, adoption is number one thing, and we actually have seen adoption significantly increase in CSAF in the last few, actually even months, but we need more, right? The other thing that I wanted to actually discuss is something that Rogue was introducing in his presentation. So this section is going to be way shorter, because you got a preview of that. But how many of you have heard before his presentation about OpenEoX? Okay. So just a few. So OpenEoX is actually something that during RSA, I think the whole thing was in RSA. Thomas and myself, we were actually talking about CSAF and VEX. And then it was a vendor meeting with CERT, and we were actually exchanging just ideas. And we said, oh, now SBOMs are not done. Like, I'm not talking about this, the problem is solved, but we're done with standards for SBOMs, and we have now standards for VEX. And we were joking, it's like, what else is there to fix? And there are two things that were crucial. Bruce can actually laugh now. One is naming conventions. And I was like, there's no way I'm gonna actually try to fix that one. So that's you guys. The second one was, in the age of AI, we don't even have a single way to even say what is end of support. Forget about end of sales, end of software maintenance, end of everything. What is supported that is machine readable, that I can feed, whether it's through an AI model or through my Python script, glorified Python script that now I call an agent, right? To do something with it. Didn't exist. So in that case, like, hey, let's actually do this. And we, of course, we have the arm from OASIS, and we decided, hey, let's actually launch a TC. And there's a lot of amazing participation, and thank you to Red Hat, Dell, many organizations are actually now participating, and of course, CISA, BSI, and so on. But the challenge that we were facing is that even within a vendor, and I'm going to point fingers just to me, right? Even within Cisco, like if you look, we grow through acquisitions, right? So you have Splunk here with their own version of end of life, end of support. You have Meraki with their own version of end of support. You have enterprise networking with their own version of end of life support. And now you have security BU with their own interpretation. There's even in one company, I need standardization, right? So the first thing that we have to do is take care of the taxonomy. So everybody will know what is actually what, and what is end of life, end of support, and so on. So that's where we concentrated. I'll probably say the last 4 or 5 months, at least 6 months of probably even more, yeah, of just getting the definitions ready. And as a matter of fact, tomorrow and Thursday, I'm bringing a few of you to Cisco to put them in a room to actually finish this thing, right? So we have to figure that out, because that is crucial. I can have a beautiful schema. Anybody can have a GitHub repository with their own implementation. I already have APIs at Cisco. I don't need this thing. I can just expose it. But whenever it comes to open source, if I want to actually block things that my developers should not be using because it's end of support, what we call end of support, which is super subjective in open source, we need that, right? And especially, this also apply to the emerging technologies that we're creating right now, including AI models. What is a support structure for an open weight model in Hugging Face? There's none, right? So definitely the need is there. So we need the common definitions. We need to focus on automation, not just delivering this to a human. And many of the standards that are machine readable, including SBOMs, it is so sad that we're giving that document, a JSON file, to a human, right? So we need to divorce from that. The other one is, of course, transparency, to be machine readable, and international standardization. So the goal here is to have a lightweight schema that if you want to just do this in isolation, that you want to create an API or some type of directory enumeration, whatever the case will be, we'll figure out that at least you can tell what is the minimum requirement of an end of life, the end of the life of a product, so end of support and so on. That can then be incorporated. So do not reinvent the wheel in an SBOM, in a security advisory, and so on. But we need to have like that very lightweight schema, but more importantly, the common taxonomy behind it based on all the use cases that we're getting, and then incorporate this across the standard. So it's not reinventing the wheel with another standard, it's actually including that, the common taxonomy, and so on. So we actually have a workshop, even though it's for the member organizations, but if you're interested in even collaborating and so on, this is all public in GitHub. And before my GPUs, kill me because I generated a whole bunch of AI-generated images, I know that I have like 5 minutes, 2 minutes. Any super fast questions? Yes.
Yes, thank you for presentation. Really great presentation, Sergey from Corona Cisco team. So this format of CSAF 2.1, I was checking for the product status details. And actually in VAX documentation, there is like this major four statuses and additional statuses. Is there a plan to develop more statuses? Because even as of today, we see that those statuses is not enough to describe all this dynamic structure of the VAX disposition data that we ingest, and it's just like not enough. That's like first question. And I was just checking this. This is like amazing, actually. We are looking right now in this contribution between SBOM, EOX data, and if there will be like this synergy that we can put connections between them, that is great. So how nowadays we can contribute to this standard maybe, and what the standard is actually like, how the standard is actually described, this connection between SBOM, VAX documentation and VAX standards, and the obviously end of life data.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to start with the second part of your question, which is, should we synchronize this? 100%. It's imperative. If not, it's going to be still continue wild west out there. How can you contribute to it? OpenEoX.org. If not, ping me directly. OS@cisco.com is my email address. Etc. And even in the OAS, omar.santos@oas.org. Believe me, I'm begging everybody to actually synchronize, these type of efforts, because it costs money. I got people assigned to these places, so we have to we have to actually minimize the costs as well. But besides that, the second thing, or the first part of your question related to additional statuses. So for those of you that are not familiar with the VEX statuses, you know, under investigation, I'm affected, not affected, and of course fix. One that a colleague of ours in here is begging for many times is the unknown state. Like you put everything under investigation, but you're not investigating. You just don't know, right? And whenever you put this into investigation, you're doing the triage, you should put that in there. So the short answer is yes, we're actually getting additional fields. We're trying to coordinate because it's not only CSAF, but we probably have to lead it through CSAF. But VEX, you know, it's a bigger ecosystem. There's other, you know, standards. That's the importance of collaboration in there. But we are definitely evaluating additional fields in the standard. And if you have any specific details of use cases, everything is driven by GitHub, but also we have a CSAF, I'm drawing a blank now, commenter. Yeah. So we have a mailing group that is also listed in there. You know, feel free to do either or. Right? So well, I like the email so people get notified too, but I'll follow up with you. Yeah.
Actually, we're probably at time here. I encourage if you have additional questions, please put them into the Discord channel. Let's give a big round of applause for Omar.